Brian, Barcelona. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Bless you, brother. I'm so excited for the audience who don't know you yet, and hopefully there's not many, but to learn about what God's laid on your life, what He's doing. I feel like we are living for a time such as this.
Yeah.
This is it. This is where I say often, I have no regrets. I don't live in the past. Even the mistakes I made, I go back and I go, okay, I made that mistake. I learned from it. But I'm not that guy that goes, oh, if I can just go back to my high school football years or live. Mm-hmm. It's now. This is the greatest time, I think, to be alive. The generations that are alive right now, to make an impact in the world. For what? To restore people's lives, to people to heal. I only know one way that works, and that's Jesus.
Yeah.
But to really go out and restore things. So tell us a little bit, Ryan, if we can, upbringing, where are you from? Where did it start? And then we'll fast track to kind of what's the calling placed on your life right now?
Yeah, well, I was born to two teenage parents. My mom was 15 when she got pregnant with me.
Really?
And, yeah. And they both got really afraid to tell anybody. So they ran away from Northern California to Southern California. This is before the days of cell phones. So didn't tell anybody they were leaving. And
As teenagers?
As teenagers. They loaded up in my dad's truck. They left. And they landed in Anaheim, where my dad got a fake ID in LA to work. And he started working. And my mom lived in the back of his camper shell in his truck till they can get a place, and didn't go to one doctor's visit for 9 months. And then I came. So I came 9 months later in October, and that shifted a lot of their lives. And I think maybe...
As it does for parents, for all of us, your life changes. Yeah. When that baby is born, everything changes.
But so thankful. I always tell my mom, and so thankful she kept me. Not a lot of 15-year-olds in her situation would have probably done that, but she kept me. And I was born. Then they randomly call my grandparents back, and they're crying. They're like, "Hey, you have a grandson." We ended up moving back, and that was kind of the start of our life. Really, a lot of crazy stuff after that: divorce and abuse, and a lot of things I grew up in. But that was kind of the starting of my life. Yeah.
And yet the show's called The Bottom Line because we're going after, I could have called it the heart of God, the root of all things. Mm-hmm. It's the bottom line. What's really important for us? We fight sex trafficking, but that's a symptom.
Yeah.
Like, what's really wrong? You know what I find, no matter where I go in the world, and this is not exclusive, but man, most of the cases, people who get called to do something really great, it's not just because they're great. Every single time I speak to those individuals, myself included, there was trauma.
Yeah.
There was serious trauma growing up, but there was an overcoming. Now, many people go through trauma, very few really overcome, but there was, I call it the fire. They're forged in the fire from young. Not just later in life, but in the formative years. For me, it was the case. I mean, it was...
Yeah.
Golly, there's things I experienced as a kid that no kid should see. And it wasn't, we were raised by a single mom, loving mom, amazing. But when I was with my dad, who was completely transient, he would show up, and then for 6 months, no one would know where he was, and he would show up randomly. I would get home from school, and he would just be there. No announcement, no communication. And I was so hungry to be with a father that I would take breadcrumbs. The time I got, it was just like, yes, right? And then I would be exposed to things, and I would never talk about it because I knew if I told anybody that this is what goes on when I'm with my dad, they would never ever let me see him. And then it escalated to a point where people found out. But I look back at those moments, and I was like, man, I learned a lot. It hurt. But a lot of who I am today is really because of what I saw. And I go, I don't want kids to go through that.
Yeah.
I don't want people to see that, right? To every single male figure on my father's side of the family, generations back, have divorced. Every single one. Even my brother has gone through divorce. And it was a moment with God for me where he says, I'm ending this.
Yeah.
I'm stopping divorce with you, Jaco.
Yeah.
But this is what you have to do. We got to break this generational curse. You got to give it back to me. And so we could become products of our environment and just give in. And I think sometimes that happens. In your case, the trauma, the stuff, whatever people want to call it, and everybody's got stuff. How did it impact you? Was it part of what shaped you to be Brian Barcelona today?
Man, I think when I look back at my life from young to growing up, seeing the abuse in my home, and I remember just witnessing physical fights with my parents. By the time I was 15, I was a professing atheist, and I remember being so tormented with anger. I was in anger management classes. Parents just had a gnarly divorce, but I remember I would get so angry that I would go into a corner and I would rock and I would scream, and nobody knew what to do with me.
You would physically manifest.
I would physically.
There would be an outward expression of your frustration.
And I think it was from growing up seeing your mom beat, and you can't do anything as a young kid. You just feel this pent up anger. And so I remember when I was 16 and I got invited to a church. This random guy who's a family friend, he comes up to me at a grocery store. He's like, Brian. I'm like, hey, man. We start talking. And he's like, hey, you want to come to youth group with me? I says, no, I don't do church. I don't do youth. And I don't believe in God.
How old are you at this time?
I was 16.
Okay.
I said, thank you, but no thank you. He goes, awesome. What about next week? I said, I don't do church, bro. Thank you. And of course he says a cliche thing. Well, I don't do religion either. I have a relationship with God. I'm like, that's cool, man. I don't want to go to your church. Thank you. And so he says, look, I'll make you a deal. He says, if you come to church with me, I'll buy you a smoothie. And I was like, what time does church start? You know, so I was cheap. So I end up.
Hey, when we're in high school.
Oh yeah, you take anything.
You'll take that smoothie, dude.
Especially back then. So
you'll even take half the smoothie your buddy left.
I will. Yeah. So
today maybe they'll stick another straw in there, but it was
back then it was different. So I ended up going to this
real straws too, not the paper nonsense.
Yeah.
Today. But anyway.
So I ended up going to this youth group. And I'm in the back of this church, and I grew up with a praying grandma. So my grandma was the only Christian in my family. She's the kind of grandma that put oil on everything, pray in tongues, just wild. So I was sitting in the back of this youth group, and worship's happening, and I'm just kind of observing. And all these kids go to the front, they're jumping, they're shouting, and in the back of this room, I start thinking, why are all these kids so happy? You know, I was really depressed. I was suicidal at this point in my life. And then I said, why ain't I happy? And then I looked to the ceiling because I figured that's where God lived. And I was like, hey, God, Jesus, I don't know if you're real. My grandma said these things about you. So, but if you're real, I dare you to touch me. And
it was a challenge.
What happened next changed the next decade of my life. I just felt this overwhelming love come over me. And I just start weeping like I've never wept before. And I don't know how it all works in the spirit. I'm not really a dude that gets taken up to the spirit often or go to heaven much, or I don't have those experiences or encounters. I can count the amount of encounters I had, but I start weeping and weeping. And I literally feel every ounce of depression, suicide instantly break. The only thing I could relate it to in the Bible is you have this persistent widow that goes to the king, and the king grants her request, not because she's faithful, but because she's annoying. And I feel like that was a picture of my grandma with the Lord beseeching this king to save.
But we're instructed to do that, man. She's like, I'm coming, and I'm going to keep coming for Brian.
Yes. And the moment I gave an inch to the Holy Spirit, he took everything. So the guy who brought me to church brings me to the front, and I receive Christ. And I remember when I wiped my eyes from crying, everything looked different. Colors, people. I went home that night and I grabbed a garbage bag and I just started throwing away everything in my room. I threw away pornography. I threw away a lot of other things that I knew just would not be okay with God. It's just this instant conviction. Then they gave me a King James Bible. Please don't do that to a young person. I was having the hardest time reading through that thing. It's like at least give a NASB or
give a New Living Translation,
something. But I'm every day I'm reading the Bible, and it was like this instant understanding of the word. To top it off, I had an atheist, wild stepdad who's every day is trying to convince me God is not real. I'm like, I know he's real. And then I get filled with the Holy Spirit, which is a whole nother moment. But it was in that time frame as a 16, 17-year-old that I met God, and I knew he was real. And I knew one thing. I knew if I'm going to do this, if I'm going to follow God, then I'm going to do with everything I got. And that's what I did. And I'm going to be 32 this year. So it's been quite a journey.
Come on, man.
Yeah.
Praise God. Interesting. So you know, I always look at the relationship between God and Satan, right? And understanding, and we can get into deep theology and exegetical scripture, and we can break the book open, we can go. But I look at that relationship. One who once was, but got cut off. So, okay, he once was what? He once was in relationship with God, which meant he drank from a living well, which was creative. He got cut off. Now he's not creative. Now he's an imitator. But he has experience, incredible experience. Yeah. He dwelt in the highest of highs. He was commander of the sky. A third of the angels fell with him when he fell. So it's serious stuff. So he's looking at avenues to attack constantly, people's lives constantly, with stuff and situations and memory. Interesting that you go to the youth group, you get touched by God for yourself. Right? It's tangible. No man's ever going to be able to, or woman, convince you, Brian, that didn't happen. You're like, I don't need anybody to confirm it. It happened. Yeah. For me, myself, personal experience, right? It's interesting that you would have a person in your life that would immediately also come against it. Right? That this was it
my stepdad
would come against it, right?
Yeah.
And I feel so often that happens where I see people give their lives. They come to a place where whether it's rock bottom or last resort or depression, or someone somehow gets them to say yes. And then I see them almost being alone and lonely because so much comes against them right away, right? This generation that you often talk about, the most informed, the most stimulated, you know, Gen Z, millennials, Gen Z, but Gen Z, there's so much coming at them. There's not a piece of information that's not available, whether it's truth or not, right? There's a lot of counterfeit, but there's just a lot. They're drinking from a fire hose every day, right? What is your experience at the moment with how to help them declutter the noise when it comes to a Jesus conversation through Jesus clubs, what we're going to talk about, to help them focus in and drown out the noise? Have you talk me through some of these conversations you're having?
Yeah. So prior to digital, I preached for 10 years in schools, and I would go to schools in South Central, Compton, East LA. So these are the wildest neighborhoods in Los Angeles.
Yeah. Maybe even some of the country.
This is what they make movies on in these neighborhoods. And I remember this one particular school I was preaching, a lot of gangs, a lot of drugs, a lot of those things. And I remember I couldn't get anyone to be quiet because you're in a gym setting. You know, we announce, hey, we're coming to the gym. We're going to give you some food, but just come and hear me for 15 minutes. So you got 200-300 kids inside of a gymnasium. And I remember talking and just conversations going on. And I remember I started telling my story. And when I started saying things about my mom being beat, instant silence.
Yep. Because they related.
I remember when I started talking about the depressions, and I realized that the greatest weapon I had against the enemy was my brokenness. And I feel like I've tried not to be a leader that flaunts his successes, because to me, the success is not in my success. It's in that I was majorly broken, even as a believer walking through things. In my brokenness, his power has truly been perfected. So how do you grab and declutter a generation? You don't come with your successes with it polished. You say, man, this is actually the brokenness of who I was. Still to some degrees what I am, walking through and figuring out who I am in God. And so when I've looked at Gen Z, that's been That's been the number one attention grabber, because you look at politicians and you look at all these people, and their number one objective is, how could I filter my life? How could I make everything look so great and so grand? And the reality,
my accomplishments and what I've done, and what,
and it means nothing.
This is why I love sport, because sport, I had a coach, it means nothing.
Yeah.
Because we can't claim the victory, though.
Mm-hmm.
Whose victory is it? Yeah. Anything I do from here going forward in my life that anybody looks and goes, that's pretty good, give Jesus the credit.
Yeah.
I am very broken. I'm a work in process, but I am his son.
Yeah.
I'm his son. And I know my identity. And I'm better today than I was yesterday. But there's not a single athlete I know that's worth his salt that'll tell you they learn more from a victory than from a defeat.
Yeah.
You learn more from a defeat. 100%.
Yeah.
You learn, because it's introspection and it connects.
Mm-hmm.
You have to take ownership. And so I think when we go, hey, Brian, they'll know me by the word of your testimony. The good, the bad, the ugly, the indifferent. And what you said, you brought silence to a room, or God brought silence to a room. Second, you talk about abuse. Yeah, because it hits home. It's personal and it's real. And it's like it's instant. It's almost like it's instant credibility too. It's like, okay, you're not here to waste our time.
Yeah.
You're here to talk about something that I hide from the world.
Yeah, and you rarely have people in those spaces of schools that talk about that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think why people would come to the clubs that we would do, largest Jesus club we ever had was 600 kids a week for years. And why they would come every week was the level of vulnerability that we would bring in with the gospel. I would constantly tell them, I'm not a motivational speaker. I'm not here to make you feel better. You know, Ravenhill's quote, we're not here to make a bad person good, but to make dead people live. That's the gospel. And I think we preached an unadulterated gospel. We preached it as raw as we possibly could. We did altar calls of salvation.
Yeah.
It wasn't, we would say, do not bow your heads and close your eyes.
No.
You with your eyes open.
Yep.
Everyone looking. Why do we teach people to make a public decision privately? No. You publicly make this decision.
Well, public in the word of God means public.
Yeah.
I don't know where it came in. Hey, let's do it publicly, but let's close your eyes. Because, every kid, you're a father.
Yeah.
I'm a father. We got young kids. There's times when you're a young kid, the kids, they close their eyes and they think you can't see them.
Yeah.
They're like they're hiding.
Yeah.
Close their eyes and their ears and they're hiding. It's like, no, it's public.
Yeah.
Let's get real.
Yeah.
Not to shame to blame, no, but to step into it and make a declaration and say, I'm choosing something here. I'm choosing life.
Yeah.
And so, I believe we got two things today. And I want you to comment on this if you can. We got a culture of life that's presented, and that comes only from Jesus.
Yeah.
And the only way to the heart of the Father is through Jesus.
Yeah.
There's no other way. Sorry, it's not through Mary.
Yeah.
It's not through St. Christopher, not to offend anybody.
Yeah.
It's just not. It's through Jesus.
Yeah.
All right? And then there's a culture of death.
Yeah.
And that one has an author too.
Hmm.
And so we are presented with a culture of life and a culture of death. And for me, I can line anything, any political speech, anything anybody talks about, I can put it in one of these two camps.
Mm-hmm.
Minute by minute. That's a culture of death statement. That's a culture of life statement.
Mm-hmm.
It's life, death, life, death. And then God says, well, who would not pick life if it's presented to you accurately? So for me, the question is this, in your experience. The power of being real with people, even as a father, when a father goes to his children and says, these are my mistakes, my opinion is, it produces infinitely better results as these are my victories. And this is where I'm good, and this is what I'm doing right,
Yeah.
It's the humility of saying, hey, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. I apologize. Explain to me how to do it better. Just going to people. Where that conversation, where do you think we are in culture today? Not just the church, but just culture in that place of taking ownership of something, repenting of it.
Yeah.
To build bridges.
Yeah. I think when people look at Gen Z and all the things that are wrong with it, Gen Z only screams what the previous generation didn't deal with. And so what one generation has in moderation, the next will have in excess. You've probably heard that before. And you look at King David, who he's preached from our pulpits as one of the greatest men of God, and he is. Jesus comes from his line. You see this parallel of mistakes and victories in his life. And I love that. And then he has a son, Solomon, who does twice as wild things, if not more, has hundreds of wives. And you wonder, how does a man who built the house of God produce a son that has hundreds of wives and God knows what else he got into? When I look at that, I kind of read between the lines and I say, maybe it was because David, with his own shame of Bathsheba, never confronted and or talked about with his son his struggles. So the struggle of his father with one woman became the struggle of his son with many. And so when you see the disconnect.
And that's the generational. When we say, hey, it's generational curses, and people say, oh, it's generational. It doesn't have to be, but it will multiply.
Yes, and I don't think generational curses are necessarily dealt with. I mean, this could happen, but I don't think the antidote is let's get a bucket, cast out demons.
No.
I think generational curses could be casted out by moments on a couch.
Yes.
Between families.
Accountability.
Yes. Moments.
Repentance.
Moments where.
Truth.
Yes. Moments where you come and, I see the reality of the home I grew up in, and I understand that there's decisions I have to make now to not have. Same with the Barcelonas. Every Barcelona has been divorced, except my grandparents. And you see this pattern and this trend. And I think where it bucks and where it stops, again, is not with, here are all my accomplishments. The greatest moments my kids have with me are moments where I've gotten on my knees and says, Daddy is sorry. Daddy spoke too harsh. Will you forgive? My daughters have only known a picture of their father as someone that comes and he says sorry, as someone that comes and humbles themselves. I literally ask my 1.5-year-old son, can you forgive Daddy?
Yeah,
I don't fully know if he understands.
No, but it doesn't matter. You're breeding a culture into
Yes.
them, and you're giving them an opportunity for Satan not to perpetuate the mistakes of one generation and multiply it and go into the next generation.
Yeah.
It's modeled.
Yeah. So when I get into schools, there's not been many students I've met that have come from broken homes that could say my father did that. My father said he was sorry. My father apologized. You hear quite the opposite.
Yeah, and it's compounded because if dad doesn't say I love you, but also doesn't say sorry, it's like it's these two necessary things in a child's life, and it just grows further apart, and it creates vacuums. It creates these chasms. And Satan, the coward is, he'll fill every chasm.
Yeah, and
then he'll bring something.
And then you have a generation that's older, that's angry at the younger for being the way they are. But these were the producers of that. You look at Gen Z. Gen Z, there's a lot of negative statistics about Gen Z, but I just heard the most wildest statistics. I don't remember them all. But one of the ones that I heard was if you take millennials, Gen X, baby boomers, all these generations, the amount of people that shared their faith is a very low percentage in those generations. I believe Gen Z is about 80% of Gen Z has shared their faith in the last year and a half. Now, I'm not saying that generation is perfect, but they are the most boldest, outspoken, proactive generations in church history, probably, other than if you were to go back to Jesus' disciples. You're seeing at the same time God is raising up this wild generation for him, there's also wild standards of the enemy he's bringing in too. You see that.
Well, that's what we do, right? So when we play a football game, we study another team. If you played the Tennessee Titans this year, which was the 2021 season, you better have an answer to stop a running back.
Yeah.
You better have an answer to stop the running back, right? So Satan goes, okay, so you're going to be the most outspoken generation. 80% of those who are Christians are willing to actually proclaim their faith.
Yeah.
He's got to go combat that.
Yeah.
And then I would argue, I understand, because the Lord instructs us to say, be gentle as a dove, but wise as a serpent. So look at the ways of Satan. And I would then argue, okay, then it makes sense to me that generation is also massively under attack with pornography.
Yeah.
So how would you silence them? Shame, guilt, get them withdrawn, close their mouths, pull them into the shadows. So if it's the most outspoken generation, well, then I want them to become reclusive.
Yeah, and you even talking with somebody earlier here in your team, you could see where Gen Z, I think it's one of the most largest consumers of pornography, but there's not probably any conscious that it's wrong. And I feel where that has come in is I grew up in my faith with generals in the faith like Lou Engle.
Yes.
different fathers who they instilled in us from a young age as a believer, young in the faith, that there are certain things in which you don't accept. You keep it a struggle. You struggle, but you keep it a struggle.
You can't give in.
You can't give in and accept it, because eventually the struggle, you defeat the struggle.
Yes.
But the moment you say, this is just the reality of my life, I'm just going to accept what's here, there's no longer any fight. And I think that what's been missing from Gen Z, which we'll get into the issue of pornography, is you have a lack of mothers and fathers that have come to stand on behalf. I had this vision once of this small village being attacked by an army, and the only line of defense were parents. And I felt like the Lord said, this village is Gen Z, and the last line of defense for Gen Z are moms and dads.
There is no, I can tell you right now, having been involved in over 20 political campaigns in the last 2 months, and our campaigns are always, we're consulting left, right, no matter what side of the aisle, the protection of children, the safety of children, the morality of children, fighting sex trafficking, pornography, right? That statement is a fact. So it is the parent. It's the last line of defense. It's the parent. But I would argue this. It should always have been there. We should always go, for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord.
Yeah.
Now all of a sudden there's a huge responsibility that falls on the father. That means the mother's not important, but it is taking that ownership back to say, we have to, because if they don't have the knowing that if I give in to this, it's death. That's culture of death. But if I battle it, surely I will overcome.
Yeah.
I will overcome.
Yeah.
Because the Lord is with me. So you have to stay in the battle. I think it's very well put. I think pornography is one of the things that I think societally we've thrown into the bucket of new normal. I cannot stand that term, the new normal. Because if you go, well, the new normal is everybody watches porn. We give into it. That's a bad place to be.
Yeah, because I think you normalize what you can't overcome. That's what happens in societies. And when you look at the Islamic faith, why do they not have a massive culture of youth pastors like Christians? Because fathers do their jobs. Mothers do their jobs. I think we've had a culture where, let me do nothing for my kid for 15 years. Oh, they're jacked up. Hey, go to youth group.
Youth pastor,
fix them in an hour a week. Send them back.
Not possible, because youth pastor missed all the formative years.
All the formative years. Youth pastor has limited resources. And at the end of the day, the youth pastor is not with that student every single day. And so I think
But he's also with 30 at a time.
Yes, or more.
Or 100.
Yeah, and you're looking at now, we're sitting here saying, what is wrong with this generation? Oh, man, it could be solely fixed with the family, And I think that's where we've decided long ago with Jesus Clubs is we don't want to build a ministry, we want to build a family. I heard this one guy say this. He said, ministries could be built with servants, but a family can only be built with sons and daughters. And I think that's the difference. Ministries have to shift their approach in this generation where people are realizing everything that they built, it's not sustainable. And I think Gen Z is provoking that in churches.
And it's exhausting.
Yes.
Because it's self-fueled.
Yes.
But if it's fueled from the well that never runs dry, it's not exhausting. So I asked many pastors, and I'm blessed to have so many pastoral friends. You included, your dear brother. We've got mutual friends, the Michael Millers of the world, Peter Lewis's, Louis Engel. So many pastors I talk to, I'll go, how tired are you? Now, I'm not talking about the tired, I've been up for 16 hours. Soul and emotional fatigue, right? If we're drawing from the well, right, there's no fatigue there. It's not a job. It's like it's from overflow. Yeah. It's from overflow we do. It's when we don't do from overflow that we run on empty. And then it gets really hard to sustain. And so if we build a whole ministry around just servants versus sonship and daughtership, right? First, sonship with the Most High God. So now all of a sudden, hey, Brian, I want you to have an intimate relationship with God yourself so that you're so full, so that when the two of us are on the journey together to go do a task God sent us, I'm not even the one sustaining you.
Yeah.
And you're not sustaining me. That's, and then, man, now that's rocket fuel. Now we can do some things.
And those are cultural things that you were probably taught by older fathers and mothers.
Only older.
Just just like me, there are certain...
Still today, my best friends are 20 years older than me.
Yeah, and I look at myself, I'm not a typical millennial. I mean, I'm 31, but I've been... My heroes and my friends were always people that were 60. You know, who did I want to be like when I was 18? I want to be like Lou Engle. What 18-year-old wants to be like a 50-year-old? I did. There was this desire, like, man, God, I want to feel, at 18, 19, I wanted to fill stadiums already. I wanted to see every high school have a Jesus Club. There was these core things in me that I feel like, man, that piece is needed so much.
Huge. What are you seeing? Talk me through Jesus Clubs, the beginning. Where is it today? Because it's shifting, but you've got your finger on the pulse, and we've been blessed by you and your team. We've been incredible. Our ministry has been, and we are being so blessed by you. But by you, because you really have your finger on the pulse. So if someone comes to me and say, "Hey, Jaco, can you do this news interview, which happens every day, on this topic? Do you need to prepare?" No, because I'm in it.
Yeah,
I'm in fighting trafficking every day, which means every news article, if it's out there, we're just in it. It's not even, "Hey, let's go prepare." We're constantly drinking. You're constantly consuming information when it comes to this generation, Gen Z, where they are in Christ, God, how they walk, talk, feel, cultural nuance, and different. So what are you seeing happening from the Jesus Club perspective, the integration of technology in Jesus, sharing the gospel?
Yeah.
What's happening?
Massive activation.
Really?
I think there is I just got a report a couple of days ago that in the last 2.5 months, we've started clubs in 30 states, 6 continents. We just did a training last night where there was a girl getting trained from Jamaica, all through Zoom from our app. I think that there is a level of...
leading a Jesus Club.
In leading Jesus Clubs. And there is a level of connection that this generation has with technology that previous generations don't understand, but it doesn't mean it's not valid. When you look at our life as believers, all of us can say we've been impacted by 66 books called the Bible.
Yes.
Although we've never seen the face of Paul, we've never heard his voice, his letters, a form of social media in his day, has greatly impacted us. I would say the same could be for videos.
Yeah.
Imagine if you would have seen his face, his facial expressions, his tone of voice. I think a lot of scriptures would have not been misinterpreted had we heard the tone of John the Baptist. I personally don't think John the Baptist was an anger voice saying, "Repent, the kingdom." I believe it was this joyful moment. Oh my God, the Messiah has come. Repent, for the kingdom's at hand. There was this different narrative, but we don't have that evidence. We don't have his videos. So I look at the way my generation was with technology. I had a flip phone. I had a Razor. We had T9. People don't even know what T9 is back in the day. It's where you push the same button 2 times, and that was how we text. You have emojis in this generation. There was a level of emotion that Gen Z could connect with that I can't. I still misread people's text messages when someone gives me one word. I'm like, oh man, they're mad. It's this
right.
It's this narrative.
It's
a
whole different language.
Whole different language.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you have,
I write full sentences, which means I complete every word.
Yes.
And then I still do is the grammar right in a text message. I try at least. And in voice, I can't stand voice text because with the accent, it all goes wet.
Yes.
I can't even order food at a drive-through, but and have it come out right. But still, you're right. It's an interesting world, right?
Yes.
With them and how they communicate. But then how they teach us too. I mean, Becca's in the studio here. Becca's a Gen Zer. She's brilliant. I mean, absolutely brilliant. But then you very quickly go, okay, but experience is needed. And elderly guidance is needed for younger generations. I needed it. It's older people that instilled a set of values. Because if my friends were the ones training me, that's called jail time.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a disaster.
Yeah.
That is a disaster. And I think my question to you is this: are we seeing what you and I benefited from? Dan in the studio, I know what he benefited from.
Yeah.
An older generation proactively investing in, setting some standards for us, helping us build balance. Do the Gen Zers have that, or are they basically training one another?
I would say it's a hit or miss. I think there's a great training of one another, which is not the best. in certain aspects. At the same time, there is a level of accountability they do provide one another. I think the lack of fathers and mothers has come from two things. I think it's come from either shame of there's really nothing that I could do to teach this generation. I hear it all the time. I'm just too old. I've made too many mistakes.
Okay. So the self-disqualification.
Self-disqualification. For me, the more gray hairs you have, the greater you're qualified.
I call it the gray and the wise.
Yes.
Well, even if you're not smart, you have a lot of repetitions.
Yes.
Man. You've made a lot of mistakes.
Yes.
My grandfather taught me this one day. He was living in South Africa. I was here already. And he said, hey, you flying a lot? And I said, yeah. He was a fire chief, a very stern man. He spoke 5 words a week to me, grabbed me by my shirt once and just punched me full on, right? And just say, I showed you the way to go. You need to listen, right? And strong. Now we can argue, okay, that was maybe over the top. I appreciated his moments. He calls me one and he said, hey, when you get on airplanes, where do you sit? I explained to him, okay, Southwest Airlines, you sit wherever you want to. American Airlines, you get a seat. You can't just sit wherever you want to. He said, you should fly Southwest. He knew nothing about Southwest Airlines. He just heard that you could sit wherever you wanted to. And he thought that was the greatest thing. And I said, why? And he goes, I want you to get on the plane and sit next to the oldest person on the plane. This is my grandfather telling me this, okay? I want you to sit next and even trade seats. And I go, why? And he goes, sit down, shut your mouth, and ask him, teach me something. And he said, I bet how much you fly, you're going to learn a lot. And that next day I walked, my next flight, I literally sat down to a guy, he could have been 102 years old. I sat down next to him and I said, my grandpa says you should teach me something. He was reading a newspaper. That still exists, by the way, and it used to. For those. He was reading a newspaper. He looked over at me and he folded the newspaper up and he said, really? And I said, yeah. He said, I got a couple of things to teach.
Wow.
One of the most incredible plane flights of my life.
Wow.
We can learn. There's a lot to pass down. Even don't do this. Yeah. Don't do that.
And I think the disconnection that Gen Z I've seen has is they need to overcome the fact that the teaching may not be filtered the way they want it to be.
Okay.
I look at one of my first.
So they want the information to come in a certain way.
What I've observed with certain individuals, I'm not saying this is an entire generation.
Interesting, Becca.
Is it needs to be filtered in a certain way, which there is a level of growth that I'm not going to say me because I'm not a grandfather, but there is a level of growth I think that older generations must understand. What worked for my dad is not going to work for me.
Sure.
My dad was a generation, you say, go to your room. Why? Because I said so. My generation, go to your room. Why? Because I said so. Why do you say so? I want a little bit more explanation.
That's my kids. That's my kids today. Now, my kids today, I am the guy, say, go to your room. Why? Because I am your father. This is my house, right? But then Arwen would say, and then I learned she wants to know why. Then I say, Arwen, I want you to go to your room. Here's why. And when I start volunteering the why and I explain to her, completely different kid. Mm-hmm. Completely different child. Mm-hmm. She wants to know why. And then she'll say it back to me. So it's because of this and this. And I go, yeah. And it creates a great teaching moment. Right? Yeah. Where I was growing up, if I asked why, smack.
Yep.
Dude, I would be standing going, why? And then I'd be looking up from the floor saying, sorry, sir. Right? Yeah. No, seriously.
Yeah.
There's no why.
And I think that there's growth points that are needed from previous generations. Like when you think of let me see an example. When you look at Egypt, right? Egypt in the days of Joseph was very different than the days of Moses.
Sure. Yeah.
What happened in the days of Joseph? It was a place of prosperous blessing, safety, abundance,
favor.
But in the days of Moses, it was slavery.
Yeah.
How did a place of abundance turn into slavery? The people of God stood there too long. I think when we stay in one place generationally in how we parent and teach for too long, what might have been prosperous for my father becomes bondage for my generation.
Not going to work.
It's not going to work. You look at that with some churches. You go into some churches, you're back in the 50s. Nothing's changed. The same pews.
And it feels dead.
It feels dead. The same pews, the exact same pulpit. And I don't believe that our methods are to be like God, where it's the same yesterday, today, and forevermore. Methods change. The message doesn't.
Yeah.
And I think that what I've learned with Gen Z is how do I package? I mean, my pastor would say back in LA, and Michael would say some of the most phenomenal things from the pulpit. And I would say, wow, this is so incredible. Gen Z would not understand it, but I do. Let me translate this now to this next generation. When you start talking about Israel, end times, some of the language that Mike Bickle might use, some of the language that Lou might use, they might not be able to grasp it fully. But if they could have a translator, someone who's maybe
talk me through some of that. Is it truly it's okay? Is it a combination of word choice and cultural reference, or is it a lens? A way of looking through the lens? I mean, because it can't just be language. I mean, the language is hugely important, but it can't just be language.
What I have learned, so I started preaching in 2009. So I was tail end millennials, and I transitioned into Gen Z not knowing what the heck Gen Z was. I found out what Gen Z was a couple of years ago. I didn't know what generations were called. I knew that I was a millennial, but I didn't know what came after that. The difference that I noticed is millennials, we still were able to be guided with the word. So you don't do this. Why? Well, the Bible says that. Okay. Now you're in a culture of progressive Christianity. You're in a culture where, and ultimately at the core of progressive Christianity and the foundation of it is they do not believe the word of God is the ultimate authority.
No, I don't know if you know that the University of Arizona, Christian University of Arizona, did a study. And the two things that Christians today in America would say is, we question whether the Bible is the absolute truth.
Yes.
That's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And then secondly, they said, we don't think we need to live by the moral code of the Bible, which is another huge disastrous problem. But it's just to support what you just said. That's an actual verified university study that came out last year that proved this.
Yes. And when you look at Gen Z, just like what you said, if Gen Z is a generation that is much more about what they feel than what they know. There are certain things that are just common sense to me.
Yes.
But I also didn't grow up fully like a normal kid. I mean, I moved out when I was 17 years old. I had a job when I was 15 years. I mean, there was a lot of things about my life that weren't normal that made me grow up quicker. But when you look at this generation, you find that they are much more in tune with what they feel than just information. So it's how do you connect information with what they're feeling as well?
Which one of those two is dominant for them?
Feelings, 100%.
And we're seeing that in culture, but you also can't just make major decisions in life based on feelings.
No, but when
there has to be a blend of information, truth.
Yes.
And then I was going to ask you, where's truth fall? Truth kind of gets lost a little bit for me in culture today.
Yes, but this is what I have found is if you could connect truth to their emotions, you get a different result. Someone can argue the book of John, someone can argue a passage in the Bible. How can you argue that I was depressed, screaming in a corner, broken, and I went to this service and something changed my life? I think and I think this is where I've seen previous generations get frustrated is I look at my dad. My dad has zero emotional connectability to me still to this day. I get on the phone with my dad. It's one word answers, very short. It's always about money. It's always about blunt. My grandfather was the exact same. If I hug my father, he'll tighten up and he won't even hug me. That is what that generation needs to overcome is their fear of emotions. This is the beauty of Gen Z. They don't fear it.
Yeah, so two juxtaposed positions, right? In the Grand Canyon in between and going, okay, but we never in life can just expect one side. This is when divorce, I always go in divorce. Hey, it's two people. Yeah, but you don't know what he did. You're 50% of this marriage. You're still there. You had a contribution. And so it's bringing these ends together.
Yes.
And God gives us the means of technology, words, but it is about understanding them first. Because how would we know where to go if we don't understand? And I think you shed incredible light now on this of we've said this politically for the last 2 years. It's all emotion. It's all emotion. Yeah. Their dominant side is emotion. Okay. Now we can hate that and keep this void in between us or say, no, how do we communicate? Yeah,
because you also see, why does this generation share their faith the most? Because there is a level of heart connect that their brains don't stop them at. Why did my father's generation, why did that generation not share their faith? There was such a self-awareness that hindered their ability. Gen Z doesn't care how foolish they look. Have you not seen TikTok and some of the dances and some of the trends? That is, but the thing is, where the enemy comes in is he says, oh, look at that. They're so emotional driven. Oh, look at that. Look at how they dress. That is the greatest. Their emotions are one of the greatest gifts if stewarded right. And it's getting them to understand your emotions is a phenomenal follower. It's a terrible leader. Let's learn to get these emotions submitted to Christ.
To truth.
So that you will, Gen Z will be some of the most connected, wet-eyed preachers that connect to their audience and their messages like no other generation, because they're not preaching information. I believe they're going to preach revelation.
Heart and revelation.
Heart and connection. Yeah. Again, where does wisdom come in? Wisdom comes in for me to say, like, I have my 4-year-old daughter. She is way more emotional than any of my children. I can say, go to your room, and it's a meltdown. Just a monstrous meltdown. And I don't understand. I literally am like, what? Why are you doing this? I said, go to your room for 5 minutes. Now the problem there is I could sit there for 10 minutes saying, why? Or I can get on my knees. I could hug my daughter and say, hey, what do you need right now? And she'll literally say a hug. It's all she wants.
I literally, one of my oldest daughter is that. I just need a hug. Yeah. I've asked Arwen so many times, how do I help you hug? I go, really? Because my generation, it's like the last thing. But it is. But also what you learn is yes, we can say Gen Z, but then every single individual is still an individual.
Yeah.
And he made us all fearfully and wonderfully in his image. And it's still about, so okay, we can pay attention to the generation, Gen Z. We still need to go to the individual, because even in that generation, there's this beautiful smorgasbord of just variety, right? And it's so important. But it's connecting. But it's important for the generations to be closer connected. And I think now we're talking about fathers being fathers and not dads. And what is it today to truly be a father? And we're launching these Watchman Warrior father-son retreats. And it's amazing what God is going to do, restoring the hearts of the fathers to the sons and the sons to the fathers. It's biblical. But when men particularly step into their rightful place as sons of God, and then leaders of their household, not because of dominance, but because of the responsibility God has given to a father to say, hey, you need a father, which means tender-hearted and go with love and forgive and be vulnerable. And, we have to, because I'm telling you, Brian, we're gaining and losing. But I think you put it beautifully. So much of what we're fighting, people are giving into. And they don't fight. They go, you know what, the fight's tough, so I'm not going to fight it anymore. Yeah. Hoping that it would be the last time they'd have to give in. And the truth is, there is no last time. Satan comes to steal, kill, and destroy. If you give in on this battle, when the next one comes, you'll breed a habit of giving in. And unfortunately, that's why we're seeing disproportionate rates of suicide in teens, divorce through the roof, et cetera, et cetera. And so we must train the generation that even if you're raised without a father, stay in the battle with Christ.
Yeah, for sure. 100%.
Yeah. So, all right, being a father, how has that changed the way you've looked at, because, okay, so you got Gen Z. So technically your kids and my kids, they're Gen Zers.
Our kids would be Generation Alpha.
Are they Alpha now?
I think they're Alpha now.
What age is Alpha?
I think Gen Z right now, some will differ between these numbers, but they say between 9 and 25.
Okay, so I don't have Gen Z kids. I've got Alpha kids.
You have Alpha, which that generation, they're still figuring out how that. I think that generation is, they're the ones that also are going to have they're going to have wild upbringing with what culturally is happening. I mean, my daughters are growing up my son was born in a pandemic. And we're now
it's different universe.
In World War. It's a different world.
Yeah.
But
we've got three, 7 and under. I mean, it's like it's a different universe. So they're Alpha. So Alpha is 9 and up. So
Gen Z ends at 25. So if they're 25 right now, they're Gen Z. So that is all when you look at these kids fighting.
And then you got this blend sometimes. You got like a crossover.
They joke around, they call it zillennials. It's like we have some people that are 25, 26, and you kind of see a little bit of both.
But I think that's for every generation, like the baby boomer, the Xers and what, crossovers. Okay. Jesus clubs. What is a Jesus club?
Yeah.
Just break it down for us, bottom line. What is a Jesus club? Is it always in a school? Is it on a college campus?
Yeah.
Walk us through Jesus clubs.
Jesus clubs it started off as campus club, students, gospel, people getting saved, discipled. Over the last 2 years, it has evolved now into more of a culture where Jesus clubs will have an expression on a campus. But Jesus clubs now is known amongst the millions of followers as people that we believe the Bible. We preach the Bible. We believe in holiness. We believe in healing. It's become now a place where kids preach online. We're starting clubs on campuses.
They're using TikTok,
all
Instagram.
Social, right?
Yeah.
They're making videos. The Jesus clubs has become a club, I guess you would say, of young people, a movement of young people around the world that are preaching the gospel. And so what's really awesome about building a culture versus a ministry is the names could change, the leaders could change, the culture remains the same. Jesus clubs is decentralized. It doesn't have a point with me on the top. It's a decentralized movement of young people all over with the same values that are biblical.
Because you can rely on that. Because between now until Jesus comes home or all the way back, he is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Yeah. Our method shouldn't be, but he is, and he's consistent. And if you build on that rock, it will stand. And so that is an incredible foundation for a movement, a club, and it's not just a ministry. It's now you can change faces and names. It will be the same because the messaging. That's phenomenal. Do you have a rough figure how many clubs you guys have?
Right now, I think we're pushing around 100.
Okay.
That's with COVID blowing us out those 2 years, not being able to gather. And then that number's growing every single week as we're training every single week. And then
you've seen a massive explosion on social media for Jesus.
Yeah,
clubs,
our
like
collective
TikTok.
following is about 11 million. And then, our hashtags have around over 400 million views. So we put out quite a bit of content every single day. Our main page, the Jesus Clubs, has just hit 1.1 million.
Jesus Club, and your main page is a TikTok page, right?
TikTok page, you have Instagrams.
Yeah.
But what's really cool is Jesus Clubs is not even our nonprofit. So it's just been a culture that's been built out of One Voice, which has just gone all over the world.
Yeah. And One Voice is
One Voice is a nonprofit that
is a nonprofit, but it's not the face that people see. They see Jesus Clubs. Yeah.
They see Jesus Clubs. And our logo is a pixelated Jesus.
Yeah, and I love it.
Yeah.
And we're doing something together with you that I think is just such a blessing, and we'll soon announce it to the folks here because it's all about mobilization, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's about how to get people to grab onto something and make it their own and then share it. You're a brilliant mind in marketing, in messaging to any generation, but really this generation. What are the things, the points of interest that you've identified, Ryan, that really intrigues them? Because I'm seeing some societal changes subtly. Give you an example. And there's other reasons for this too, okay? But it's the lowest viewed Academy Awards in history. It's lost its status position.
Yeah.
That awards show has lost its status. It used to be almost like the Super Bowl. It's Academy Award. People would have voting parties and they would watch, right? And it was what are they going to wear? Mm-hmm. I guarantee you, I can talk to Gen Zers right now and go, what month of the year is the Academy Awards? And they would not be able to tell me. I don't even
know what that is.
They would not be able to tell me.
Yeah.
Okay? All right? You don't even know what that is. Exactly. Right? But you're a content creator. And so there's no way 5 years ago any content creator is not glued to the Academy Awards. Okay? I look at Super Bowl watching is still high, but when you break it down generationally, it's different, right? So I'm seeing some of these things that's been societally like these stalwart moments and things, and they've lost importance.
Mm-hmm.
Politics, however, politicians have become celebrities more than ever before, because the generations are more informed about what each politician does. What are some of the key things, important things? You could say, Jaco, physical activity, Jesus. You could say sugar. You could say, I don't know, anything. What are the things that you feel most important to Generation Z?
Why has celebrities taken a backseat to politicians? Let me answer that real quick. From my perspective, celebrities don't have the same ability to make change like a politician does. So you have people that are more inclined with a politician because they want to see change. You also are in a generation where before people were, they admire someone with 100,000 followers. I mean, you can get 100,000 followers in 2 months. It's not difficult anymore. I know 18-year-olds with 1.2 million followers. I know an 18-year-old that I'm doing their wedding in June who has an accumulation of 19 million followers. They are not paying for anything for their wedding. It's all donated by sponsors. When you have a generation where fame, it's like gold has no value in heaven.
Fame has no value.
Fame has no value in this generation anymore because anyone can have it. So again, there's a different currency.
But it's empty.
Mm-hmm. And there's a different currency with this generation.
Is it change?
That matters. I believe it's change. It's activism. It's change.
Because that would make sense why politicians all of a sudden have become... Now, this is not necessarily good because there has to be some change in politics.
100%.
Because I believe we have people in politics that got in for the wrong reason and they're in there to stay there. They're not really there to make change.
But I don't think that those people stand a chance lasting much longer, especially with social media. That's the thing. You can vote with your emotions, but when you don't see change, inevitably the thing that works for the good of that is you're going to say, hey, you know what? I was duped. What this person promised is not what's being delivered.
Which has been for a long time the norm, unfortunately. If you really know, and I think, and that's exciting to hear that.
Yes,
Gen Zers are about change. Now we can decide what type of change, because change may mean change to become more immoral or more moral or whatever, right?
Yeah, but this is why we preach the gospel
so that it is positive change.
And you might remember, not to get political here, but you might remember when Trump did this big gathering. And, they said it was going to be one of the most biggest attended gatherings. And when he got there, it was half full. And the reason why was TikTokers who were against Trump mobilized other TikTokers and reserved all the seats and never showed up. What did that show me? The power of this generation does not lie anymore in big titles. You look at, I seen this other post yesterday where Biden tweeted something and Elon Musk responded. Elon Musk had 6 times the amount of likes. What does that show you? It's a different day and age. It's not just a position of powers that hold powers anymore. The scales are tilted. So what should we be focusing on? Should we be focusing on big name politicians? No, I think you focus on this next generation who I believe actually can get things done if they're stewarded right.
And it takes an investment.
It does.
Time, the most expensive investment, an emotional investment, which for some may be the most difficult investment. If we listen to what you're saying, and we're in this culture. We're going after it because. For us, and this is not even about Gen Z, it's just for a very long time, the number one traffic victim by age demographic in the US is 12, right? So it's always been, which would qualify as a Gen Zer, as the Gen Zer of every generation. It's the young person of every generation, right? And so that's always the battle for us is there, and it's younger and younger. Now we're looking at kindergartners being attacked by certain things, and we've got, so we have to stay in touch with the new generations because evil's going for them because of their value. I mean, and because, you touch a child in a house, you touch the household. Yeah. You grab a child, that's Disney's model. Hey, Daddy, want to go to Disney? Well, okay, they're going to get you.
Spend $5,000 at Disney.
That's it. It's
because they watched a movie, yep.
$5,000 is gone because they watched one movie. They watched Frozen. You go, why did we ever bring Frozen into our house? Yeah. Right? All of a sudden, you got the Elsa costume, and here you go. And so Satan knows that too. And so we have to invest serious time into learning from people like you. And then there's not many like you, but people like you or your groups. So if people go to Jesus clubs, they're going to get an introduction to this culture.
Yeah.
From the perspective of this culture wanting to share the gospel of Jesus Christ. For the mom and the dad out there right now who has a high schooler or a teenager who does not know the Lord, introduce them to some of the people that's on the Jesus Club. Introduce them to some of these. What would you advise? How do we steer those that don't know towards them, and how do we help you shed a light on what it is that God's doing in this calling on your life?
Yeah, to the mom and dad with unbelieving kids, man, throw everything you got to see them saved. And it's not just bringing them to church. Go have ice cream with them. Go watch a movie with them. Go find out what they love.
Build relationships. You are never going to get back these years. And I'd argue we can't fix this later. I mean, God can, but it's painful. Painful later.
I mean, I would throw everything you got into seeing your young person, like, win their heart. If you want to help other believers, I mean, we have an app. You can download the Jesus Clubs. There's trainings on the app, both digitally and in campuses.
At the App Store?
On any app platform. And if you are a parent and you're like, well, I don't know what to do, go and start a social media page and start preaching the gospel. I think that we're in a generation today that the only excuse you have to not preach the gospel is you don't want to. You can't say you can't no more. I don't have a plane ticket. I can't go to this country. That's old news.
Yeah.
With technology, the only excuse now is I don't want to preach the gospel, not I can't.
Yeah, and I don't want to hear about cancel culture or none of that. Just speak.
Yeah.
Just go dive into Psalm 81, verse 10 and look at the promise. When you open your mouth, I will fill it.
It's true.
Just go. Just start somewhere, one person. And it's worth it for one. You would have done it for one. Brian, you're a gift. You're a blessing. You and your team, you do amazing stuff, and just it's exciting to see. It's exciting to see the church community also embrace you. And again, huge kudos to Michael Miller and Peter Slover and the guys at Upper Room. But other churches are too around this country saying, hey, okay, wait a minute, Brian. Come sit with us. We're going to humble ourselves. No matter what great theologians they are, God's given you a grace and a mantle, and I'm very big on honor and mantles. When God's given a mantle, so often we see people trying to take that mantle. Or go, I can be Louis Engle, or I can be, or this is why the inventor syndrome is so heavy. You watch movies of inventors of technology, how they get pushed out by people that fund. They go, we can do it. Thank you for starting it, inventor. And I go, there's a mantle on that person. God chose that person. You want that person well taken care of, and I'm watching churches, and I'm watching church. This is inner church fighting all the time. Oh, this pastor, that. I'm watching churches embrace you, and maybe not all of them, but I am seeing some embrace you, and that's really comforting to me because I'm saying, yes, bring Brian in. The churches that are listening to this, the pastors, reach out to Brian, reach out to Jesus Clubs, reach out to One Voice, and say, Brian, talk to us. How do we win the hearts of this generation? What is it? Because God's given you, and I'm not limiting what he's doing in your life to that, but no question, the fruit is there, right? So he's given you this mantle and this understanding to steward that conversation for the body. And it's exciting to see churches take a step in that direction with you and humble themselves and say, come help us, which is what we did. It's like, hey, we need help, and so thank you for that, right? I mean,
thank you.
Yeah, appreciate you. We're gonna have you back and just continue the conversation. I'm excited for what God is doing, right?
Thanks, Jaco.
We'll point people your way. God bless you. Thanks, man. Talk to you guys soon.